What is up, and I welcome each and every one of you back to a brand new video. Today we're going to be discussing the top 10 Humankind beginner tips. That's right, the game just came out. I do have a good amount of hours on it already. Probably not as much as some of the other people, but I do feel like, especially with my experience in the previous open beta, that I can provide some details and some beginner tips so that you don't make the same mistakes I did. And boy, there are a lot of mistakes that I made when I first started out in this game. So yeah, if you do enjoy the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, obviously. And yeah, let's get into the video. And the first tip we're going to talk about is something simple: don't fight the mammoths. I know what you're thinking. If I have the high ground and they're on a river, don't fight the mammoths, all right? It's that simple. Especially if you only have one unit, fighting a mammoth, you're going to lose like 90% of the time. If it's like your first unit and you just attack the first mammoth you see, you are going to lose the game immediately. It's happened to the best of us. I'm just warning you guys right now. Don't fight the mammoths. Early on, you do want to mostly just run around fighting deer and collecting food. After you get a couple population, maybe about 2 to 3, then you could go ahead, maybe fight a mammoth. Surround the mammoths, obviously. Attacking them from the back and from the front will give you an extra combat bonus. And obviously take the high ground when fighting other people. The bears, you could fight the bears. They are kind of aggressive, so you will have to fight them eventually. But yeah, deers are okay. Bears are don't risk it. And mammoths are absolute no-go zone. That's the first tip. Second tip we are going to be talking about is you only need one era star to progress through the Neolithic era, and you want to get the science bonus if you can. Now, you can get 3 era stars, 3 different ones, depending on what you've done. One is getting 5 population. That's getting 5 people in your little empire, I guess. You need 20 food to get an extra population. Get 20 food 5 times from picking up food or killing animals, and or just, I guess, freedomizing animals is a better way to put it, and you are easily going to be able to get an era star that way. You could also freedomize 5 animals and just get an era star that way. That, you get militarist star for beating the animals, for killing 5 animals, and finally you get you get an era star for getting 10 science. Now, the way you get 10 science is you walk around and you pick up those little science symbols on the ground. You get 10 of them. Some will provide 1, some will provide 2, some resource science things will provide 3. Once you get 10 total science from collecting, maybe, I'd say on average you'd collect 4 or 5 of those little things on the ground, you will get an era star. But not only that, you will also get the Neolithic era bonus, which is either 1 food per population, 1 production, or 1 science. It's really strong and it's really good to have. Don't obviously spend like 20 to 30 turns running around trying to find the science era star. It might not be worth it, but if you can, you would definitely want to try your very best to get 10 science so you could get the Neolithic era trait bonus and then move on to the next era. Now we're going to go ahead and look at tip number 3. Tip number 3 is split up and explore. Now, splitting up and explore is the best way to play this game. Keeping all your units clumped up together might help you in defense. Maybe you could take out a couple mammoths that way, but it really is not worth it in my honest opinion. Having to attack 3 different units, having to explore with 1 unit is a lot less optimal than exploring with like 5 or 6 different units. You'll be able to uncover the map much quicker. You'll be able to find some better cities to settle. You'll be able to find some better outposts, and also luxury and strategic resources like copper and horses are revealed in the Neolithic era. So you could just run around, go ahead, find some resources, settle on top of them, and then you could like progress towards like the Assyrians for their horse raiders, or you could go for Babylon for the unique spare unit that both require copper or horses respectively. So yeah, you want to split up your units, cover as much ground as possible. And let's move on to tip number 4 right now. That is find at least a 10-10 spot for your capital. When you're going to build an outpost, you're going to see how much food and production each city spot gives you. Aim for at least 10 and 10. It doesn't have to be that. It could be like 13 food, 8 production. It could be 8 food, 13 production. Heck, if you find a spot with like 8 food, 8 production, that is good enough. But for your capital especially, you do want to put it in a decently defensive location. But more importantly, you do want to go ahead and give yourself double-digit food and production. I don't think it's worth it to put your capital in an impenetrable city spot if you're going to get like really bad yields. Like maybe you'll be between 2 mountains and you have like 2 food, 5 production. I think that's a lot worse than being in sort of like an open area and getting 10 food, 10 production, because again, you should have more than enough units to defend yourselves, and cities are pretty strong when defending by themselves in Humankind. But yeah, it's pretty much the only thing I wanted to talk about. That wasn't too long. Let's move on to tip number 5. Settle horses and copper early on for units. Units early on require very few strategic resources, and they are very scarce, quite honestly. They're super duper scarce, in my opinion. We'll get to that tip a little later. But early on, you only need 1 horses or 1 copper. The way strategics works is kind of like in the base game Civ 6, where if you had 1 horse resource, you'd be able to build horsemen. 2 horse resources would let you build an unlimited horsemen. In Humankind, if you have 1 horse resource, you can build any unit that requires 1 horse, like the Assyrian Raider or Horseback Rider. And copper, you only need 1 or 2 depending on the unit. Sometimes you need both for like a chariot or something like that. But really try to get at least a horse or copper unit, so you could go ahead, build the unit. Maybe you could pick someone with an emblematic unit that requires those yields, or you might as well just build powerful spearmen or horseman units yourself. Go ahead, knock out and boink your first enemy, get a lot of land, maybe even make them your vassal after a couple wars, and yeah, after that you should be okay. And yeah, settle those resources when you can. Obviously, don't go out of your way and go to like the worst city spot imaginable to get those resources, but definitely keep that in mind when you are settling your first city. The 6th tip we have today is going to be fame dictates who wins, but not who is the strongest. Now, let me explain. Usually, yes, you can look at fame and be like, this guy is doing really well in the game. But with all the different era stars, you don't exactly know what they might be good at. For example, if you are super strong militarily and you are like half the fame of somebody who's number 1, it might be worth it to declare war on them, because they might be getting all those era stars from being builders or agrarians or, you know, something like that. Maybe they're not too strong militarily or scientifically, quite honestly. So you could go ahead, declare war on them, and you should be fine. Never look at who has the most or least fame as who is the easiest civ to take out or the strongest civ to take out. Fame comes from a lot of different numbers, and really focusing on one could get you more faith than really just being a jack of all trades type of thing, because you obviously have bronze, silver, and gold. Silver and gold give you a lot more fame than bronze era stars. And yeah, when you're going to declare war, you can just go ahead, click on the leader profile, hover over their relationships with you, whether it's hate-filled, benevolent, or whatever it might be, neutral, and it'll show you you are much stronger than them or they are much stronger than you, and you would then know, okay, I can beat this guy in a war and maybe knock him down a peg or two, which is definitely a very viable strategy. Or he might be super duper powerful with like planes while you're still running around with sticks and stones, and you might just want to restart that game if that does end up happening. But yeah, that entire tip can be summarized by fame dictates who wins the game, but it does not dictate who is the strongest at this specific point. Let's now move on to tip number 7. Always level up your culture when you can. Now, what I mean by that is you could wait and get a couple more era stars, and, you know, you might be getting a little greedy, you know what I mean? You know, you might be like, oh, I'm like 5 era stars away from 5 population from getting another one. Let me just get this 8th era star and then level up. I don't think that's the best idea for a multitude of reasons. Number 1, okay, if you're like 1 turn or 2 turns away from getting that era star, fine, you can wait a little bit, but usually you do want the best possible culture in the next eras. You know, obviously there are a large number of cultures that are very good, but maybe you're going for like a science or production or military game, maybe you have a specific culture in mind. The more you wait, the more likely it is the enemy AI, especially on larger map, swallows up that culture before you, and it could avoid, you know, it could mess up your game a lot. So always what I recommend doing, unless you're like 1 or 2 turns away from getting a couple era stars, always choose the next era when you can, especially on the higher difficulties I found. Yeah, it's pretty much all I wanted to say for that. Next up, we got tip number 8. Tip number 8 is the best civs for each era. Not the best civs, but these are still all very effective civs. I'm going to give 1 for each era. For the ancient era, it's definitely the Egyptians, I think, are a very strong civ. Obviously, the Harappans are also very strong, and Egypt might not be the strongest, but the amount of production you can get on Egypt definitely sets you up later on to build your emblematic buildings faster, to build a bigger army faster, and their unique unit is nothing to scoff at. When it comes to the classical era, Carthage is another very strong civ because culture, I don't know why I keep saying civ, it's culture in this game. It's a very strong culture, Carthage is, because the 25% cost reduction in buying out buildings, which you can do, pretty much just buy buildings you're building, is very effective on building cities very, very big, especially with the merchant focus Carthage has. You'll have more than enough money to build as many buildings as you want in each of your cities. Next up, for the next era, we have the Kamai in the medieval era. Shut up, phone, you're not important. The Kamai, I just played as the Kamai in my episode 2. I don't think I'm going to post that because it's just super boring, but I ended up getting 40 production from the emblematic district in the medieval era while playing as the Kamai per district. I literally had cities with over 1,000 production, and industrial zones beside the emblematic district gave me 20 to 30 production as well. So one emblematic district is 40, surrounded by 2 or 3 production districts. I was getting so much production, I was literally one building everything in my city. I was one building districts, one turn building. I didn't even have to buy them out because it was so easy to just build. It was absolutely insane. I think the Kamai might be the best for the medieval era, but they're still definitely a very good civ to pick. The Joseons are very good at science. I do recommend them in the early modern era, or it's the Renaissance era. I'm not too used to the eras, but I think it's the Renaissance era. The Joseons give you a large amount of science, which could help you get to planes a little bit faster than usual, and maybe even go ahead and go for some late game warfare if you want. Next up, we got the Persians for the mighty works, giving you production and being able to produce wonders and shared projects in the early modern era. Could be very effective while boosted with the Persians. The Turks are the best, not the best, but I think they're a very strong contemporary era culture, giving you massive amounts of science and growth. Again, these civs that I mentioned, these cultures that I mentioned, aren't necessarily the best, but they are ones I find to be very, very strong, and the AI doesn't really pick them too much for the most part. Tip number 9, we have war. Everything about war. A couple tips I do want to give out. You could only declare a regular war at 100 war support, or you could declare war, but you get a penalty and you lose a certain number of war support every turn when you declare a surprise war, a lot more than usual. Taking enemy cities is the best way to destroy war support. The enemy will lose maybe 5 or 6 per turn when taking a city versus losing 5 or 6 at once when losing a battle. Again, I do recommend going for cities. Going for armies could be nice, especially if you're going to defend or prevent them from pillaging your outposts or cities, but taking cities is a lot better when it comes to decreasing the enemy's war support and increasing your own. Next up, we have take the high ground. This one's simple. You get 3 combat strength when attacking from the high ground or when defending from the high ground. You always want to keep the high ground, especially when you're with archers. Archers get the combat bonus. Even if they're like 2 or 3 tiles away, they're still going to get the high ground bonus. So the high ground is definitely key. The other thing I do want to talk about is the surrounding bonuses, the attack from the rear bonus. You want to essentially make your units and the enemy unit in a straight line. So you want your one unit to the left, the enemy unit in the middle, and your unit to the right. Once your units are in a straight line, your 2 flanking units and the enemy unit, you will get another combat strength bonus for attacking from the rear. That's why you should always wait for 2 units before going after elephants, because that might help you just destroy the elephants. Again, don't attack the mammoths. The mammoths are super duper strong. Wait till you have 2 or 3 units before attacking them. And it's pretty much all I wanted to say about war. Obviously, late game when war comes on, you can use artillery and planes to help you bombard enemy units during a battle. But yeah, this is pretty much the nice early basic stuff for winning any war in the early to mid or even late game, quite honestly. And finally, last but not least, tip number 10, strategic resources are super duper scarce in this game. A lot of the late game units require multiple of a strategic resource, like maybe 3 or 4 of a strategic resource, I think, and you really aren't going to find more than 2 or 3 in your empire if it is big enough. You are going to have to trade for a lot of strategic resources. They are really hard to come by, but that also means they are really going to be great if you do have enough to start building your units, because in all likelihood the enemy AI is not going to have enough to build their units using that specific strategic. So if you go ahead and beeline gunpowder and then you get you have enough what's that thing called again, niter I'm gonna call it, I completely forgot its name, but if you're playing like the Ottomans, you could build your Janissaries, and then the enemy probably won't have musketmen, and you could just go to town. But strategics are super rare. You're gonna in all likelihood have to trade for most of them, but if you do have strategics in your empire, especially in the early to mid game, you definitely want to exploit them and go to war as soon as possible. That is going to be it. I hope you guys did enjoy it. If you don't forget to like and subscribe as always. And yeah, what else can I say? Without further ado, I will see you all in the next video. Peace. Huge shout out to my members: Cash Christian, Ben Ownby, John Blair, Jackson Perez, Polaris Gaming, Emporium, Adam Mester, Jeff Utzler, Kim Cosmos. A really special shout out to my oh my god subscribers, Robert and Overflow of Amenities.